We're going to get started rather quickly. We have people that have flights to catch tonight, and we're running a little late.
Thank you.
Pat, if you see any commissioners out in the hall, bring them in. I'd like to get started. Not yet. Okay, if we can have some quiet in the room. We're going to start the ISFMP Policy Board. Welcome. And you should have the agenda and minutes from our last meeting. There will be some changes to the agenda, primarily adding a couple of things under other business. It's mostly letters from earlier board meetings that will go out under the commission signature. I'm not going to itemize them right now. We'll cover them under other business, and we have a letter from one district attorney with the Department of Justice asking for a letter of support on a criminal case they're dealing with, and we'll discuss that under other business. And we're going to make the schedule change to move Mr. LaPointe up in the schedule. So unless there's any objection about the agenda and the minutes, I'll consider them approved. Seeing none. Is there any public comment at this time for the ISFMP Policy Board? I see none. George, we're ready.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you for moving me up in the agenda. I'm here to talk about, I'm here to be too loud, I'm here to talk about the electronic technologies and fisheries data project I'm working on with the National Marine Fisheries Service, which is going to be on the board in a second. Or not. Can you bounce to the next slide? So the big picture goal of this is to ensure that NOAA Fisheries Science is providing trusted fisheries information to meet varied needs of our partners and stakeholders. And the project goal that I'm working on is to evaluate emerging technologies, and we'll talk about those in a minute, for use in fisheries-dependent data collections. Next slide. Oh, I have to do it here too. Jesus Christ, I'm asleep at the wheel. NIMS has taken a number of actions to move along with electronic technologies, and one is the production of some white papers discussing electronic monitoring from an enforcement perspective, from a build-out perspective. They're pretty comprehensive papers. I will make sure the website's up there, and it'll be up on the Commission website as well. But for those folks who are interested in the thick book on electronic monitoring, those are worth looking at. There's also a policy directive from May that was issued by the National Marine Fisheries Service, and it basically said we will promote the use of electronic technologies, and by that they primarily mean electronic monitoring, electronic reporting, and VMS as much as we can. We will try to put those in fisheries where appropriate. We will, with new implementation of electronic reporting, electronic monitoring, try to look at some new cost of sharing formulas. That means the feds don't have as much money to pay as they used to. And it will direct, the bottom thing is the direction to the regions to put together regional electronic technology implementation plans. And those are being developed by the NOAA regions, but for the council regions. So there will be 8 plans when they're done. Please. The regional implementation plans are my glasses are right at the wrong stage for this, are supposed to identify technical and scientific issues, budgetary issues, and policy and regulatory issues, because the move towards electronic monitoring, for instance, will require a lot of FMPs to be changed. Evaluating trade-offs for the fisheries that are suitable for electronic monitoring and electronic reporting, and the appropriate technologies as well. And then it will talk about which fisheries should have electronic monitoring and electronic reporting implemented, and the time schedule for those as well. Next. The timeline for the project, the first part, it actually didn't start, well, they started their process in winter of 2013. I have been talking primarily to people in the management community between the start of the project and now. Councils, the commissions, regional offices, science centers, and I'm now shifting to the formulating ideas, some of the cross-cutting ideas that I'll talk about in a minute, as well as talking to stakeholders, people in fishing organizations, individual fishermen. I learned a lot from Rick Bellavance, for instance, and working with NOAA Fisheries to figure out a good stakeholder outreach program as well. Excuse me. I will also be working with the regions in the next little while, framing what a regional implementation plan will look like, and then they will start working on those, and we'll clearly have to have a consultation process through spring and fall of next year so that you know what is in those plans. Oh, that's just what I'm doing. What I've been hearing thus far, and again, I've met with a lot of folks. The only council I have not met with yet is the Caribbean Council. Is there is a real strong interest in adopting new technologies. Generally, when you talk to industry members, they think the agency is going way too slow, and they probably are. And generally, when you talk to the agency, they think the industry is going too fast, and they probably are. We don't have a good bead on how to implement at the right pace at this point. Nationwide electronic reporting is lower-hanging fruit. We have the technology to do this now. There's a strong desire to do it, so how we put the pieces together. I talked to ACCSP yesterday, and to do it in a coordinated and non-redundant, is that right? Yeah, a non-redundant way is going to be really important. Electronic monitoring, they have in some Alaska, operational in some of the big fisheries in Alaska, and there have been pilot projects around a lot of the rest of the country. And New England's had one. Alaska's had one. Pacific groundfish has had one in both the Gulf and the South Atlantic. But we'll talk about some of the challenges of moving from the pilot projects to full implementation. And the last issue, which I'm actually going to talk to a guy about tomorrow, is the connection for electronic reporting and electronic monitoring to helping people in the seafood industry with traceability and sustainability interests. There's a guy from Darden who says they want this to be in place because it will help with their worldwide marketing, and I've heard it from others as well. The issues that have been raised, the implementation and maintenance costs, how much does it cost to put these programs in place and keep them going? The electronic monitoring systems that have been tested around the country cost about $10,000 a piece, and the operating costs, although people think it's going to be lower than observer costs, isn't going to be, I think it's still going to be substantial. Industry acceptance is a big issue to make this work, to have, this is more for monitoring than reporting. To make this work, you're going to have enough of the people in the industry want to make it work, because you have to have individual boat plans, you have to put it in place, you have to test it, and then keep it up as you go along. There are issues of confidentiality in law enforcement. I talked to the law enforcement committee today. Chain of custody issues with the information and how it will be used from a compliance and an enforcement perspective. The confidentiality of the data, who owns it, who has access to it. People in the industry are concerned about that issue in particular, and the issue of availability of technology for compliance, monitoring, and catch accounting, and I'll talk about that in a minute. There are a number of issues that I call them cross-regional issues that come up time and time again. One is how we move from pilot projects to full implementation. In New England, the pilot program had between 6 and 10 vessels, depending on when it was occurring. The groundfish fishery has 700 vessels. So how do you scale up from a pilot project to a fishery with 700 vessels in it, 1,100 in Southeast Alaska? Some people think it means putting a unit on every vessel. Some people think it means subsampling, but we aren't sure how that will occur, and how you build out the program from the agency perspective to handle the care and feeding of the system. The cost comparisons is a cross-regional issue. Electronic monitoring compared to observer coverage. There's a lot of apples to oranges kind of discussions, and we need to get better at that, and the cost comparisons for different technology options. There are 2 steps for electronic monitoring or 2 technological advancements that are needed. One is data storage and transfer. Right now, with the pilot projects, people physically take out the hard drive that has all the information on it, and it gets transferred to the agency or the third party that's monitoring the information. When I was at the Northeast Fishery Science Center, the time needed to go to the dock, pick up the hard drive, and come back was 3.5 hours. That's great in a pilot project, but again, expand it to a full fleet, and that's not going to work. They do that now because a 3-day trip takes about half a gigabyte of data, and that's too much to send electronically. They are working on a technological solutions way beyond my capacity, but to teach the whole system to grab just the frames and the clips they need, the behaviors and the activity patterns, and it will make that half a gigabyte of data probably 50 megabytes, and then you can start talking about sending it electronically. It also then helps with the law enforcement chain of custody issues. The other is image recognition. The cameras and the software are getting a lot better, but if you want to count fish and estimate size, they can't do that yet. I think they're getting close, but they aren't there. And then the other cross-regional issue is how do you implement electronic reporting and electronic monitoring in recreational fisheries? You'll hear from Gordon we've talked about it. In recreational fisheries, there's a program called iAngler and iSnapper, I think it is, and they are tablet or cell phone-based systems that allow self-reporting, and they're really cool, but you have the same problem of, is it representative of the population you're trying to sample? I was talking to some folks, I said, the concern is you'll have the highliners and the braggarts and the psychos reporting and not everybody else, and so it's an issue that the MRIP program is addressing, but is a clear we need resolution before it's useful in getting better recreational fisheries estimates. And then both the issue of reporting and electronic monitoring in party charter is probably, it's certainly a significant issue, but it's probably farther along than in the private angler category. I had mentioned before law enforcement and confidentiality. Those are issues that I'm working with NOAA GC and law enforcement people to address those issues before the plans are done. And I talked to the ASMFC Law Enforcement Committee about communicating with them, because making sure that the state enforcement people are plugged into that process as well. IT infrastructure is an issue for the data storage. I was in Alaska, and they've got limited, a couple fisheries with a small number of vessels in them, and the storage needed for record retention and whatnot for multiple hard drives with half a gigabyte of data is huge. Information security is an issue, and then connecting monitoring and reporting so that in fact there's a common record so that George LaPointe's electronic reporting records and electronic monitoring records match up. This is something that the data people are fairly concerned about. And then managing expectations. There's clearly a lot of pressure for people to say, let's put more electronic monitoring. There's an issue in Southeast Alaska now where the fixed gear folks want something in place for next February, and it's causing a lot of angst. And I think that's probably too fast, but they're getting pushed for it, both politically and by the industry. The next steps for me are, completing the first round of meetings. I can cross that off my list. Continued meeting with stakeholders. I'm meeting with the NOAA fisheries folks, and if people have ideas about how to reach a broad array of stakeholders, I'm very interested in in ideas. Working on those cross-regional issues, working with regional offices on the draft plans, and there will be a National Electronic Monitoring Workshop on the 8th and 9th of January of next year in Seattle. This is being organized by Dorothy Lohman, who is a consultant and chair of the Pacific Commission, and the idea is how do you get electronic monitoring systems implemented well in our fisheries. Jump 2 slides. And so I would love advice on how best to keep engaged with the states and with stakeholders. Any help I can get with identifying key stakeholder contacts and engagement opportunities in your states to talk about this, because we're at that stage now, I would appreciate, and then any other ideas you have. That is it for me, Mr. Chairman. Thanks.
Okay, thank you, George. Any questions for George? I know some of us have heard this a version of George's presentation earlier in the week, but at ACCSP, for instance. George, I don't see any questions. You're going to get to the airport on time.
Thank you. Okay. And I will. I'll work to make sure that I continue communicating with staff so that you guys keep plugged in.
Absolutely.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, George.
Gordon, you can queue up if you like, if you're ready. Next, we have Gordon Colvin here, and he's going to talk about, or he's going to provide an update to the MRIP program. And I know Gordon has taken some time earlier in the week to meet with some of us, which might eliminate some questions from this presentation. But Gordon, you can take it away.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And as you'll all see, I'm joined today by Press Pate, Chairman of the MRIP Operations Team, and it's our pleasure to be here again to once again be honored by having you provide us with time on your agenda to update you on what we're up to here. We've had a lot of opportunity to communicate with the Atlantic Coast states, and we appreciate that, and we recognize the importance of keeping all of the commissioners up to speed on the progress we're making. I'm going to work through these PowerPoint slides, a lot of them, and there's a lot of information on some of them. You may find it easier to follow with the copies that you have in on your laptops and tablets, or that are being handed out. I think Tony has a few copies in the back of the hard copies of the slides if you want to follow there. We're kind of thinking that hopefully that this information, which will be more detailed in some instances than I'll actually report on going through, will be available to you as reference information between now and the next time we get together. We're going to try to do a very brief run through of the background of MRIP and its origins and where we are with it. A summary of the status of the improvements we've made to date for the Atlantic Coast. I want to spend a few minutes talking about party charter boat logbook discussions that we all need to have that are upcoming, and there's at least 2 handouts that have gone around to you on that subject. One is simply a much more detailed version of the other. Our new implementation plan has just been completed for FY14. I want to hit what the priorities are on that, with emphasis on the implementation plan's strategy for regional implementation of MRIP survey improvements. So MRIP is a Marine Recreational Information Program, and it's a direct outgrowth of the review that was conducted by the National Research Council at the request of NOAA Fisheries and completed in 2006 of recreational survey methodologies nationwide. It's safe to say that the results of that independent high-level scientific review left the agency pretty well bruised and beaten over the methodologies it was using in the past and what the experts saw as real flaws in some of the details of the survey designs. Congress picked up on that and incorporated in the Reauthorization Act, the Magnuson Reauthorization Act that was enacted in January of 2007, a requirement for NOAA Fisheries to create this new program and to implement through it as many of the recommendations of the NRC review as were feasible. MRIP is organized under a governance structure that was established in the National Marine Fisheries Service Office of Science and Technology, in which the program is located. There is an executive steering committee, which is comprised of John Borman, Emeritus Director of our office as chair, Ned Sear, who is the Director of Science and Technology, myself, the three Interstate Marine Fisheries Commission executive directors, including Bob, and representatives from the Pacific Islands, Caribbean Fishery Management Councils, their executive directors, MAFAC, and well, I guess that's it. So the membership of the Executive Steering Committee reflects the philosophy of MRIP that this is not an Office of Science and Technology alone program. It is one that we will carry out in conjunction with our partners and key stakeholders. The Steering Committee created 4 teams. The operations team, which Press chairs, which is the major responsibility for developing, pilot testing, and certifying improved survey design methodologies. The registry team, which I chair, whose work is largely complete in terms of creating as complete as possible a registry of saltwater anglers nationally. Our communication and education team that coordinates outreach activities. And some of you may recall that team has been chaired from the beginning of the process by Forbes Darby of the NIMS Communication Office. Recently, Forbes has stepped apart from the chairmanship of that committee, and it will now be chaired by Dr. Leah Sharp of the Office of Science and Technology staff. But Forbes isn't getting too far away from us. He'll still be on the team and a big source of support. Our information management team is chaired by Lauren Dollinger-Few of the Office of Science and Technology, and those are the guys that handle the data management activities for us and improvements necessary. Our basic strategy all along has been to address the fundamental design requirements that resulted from the NRC review first as the highest priority. That work has been ongoing since the beginning of MRIP, and a number of the key improvements there have been completed or are close to nearing completion. Then having finalized and certified new survey methodologies, those are available in the toolbox for use as appropriate around the country and in our various regions. And having completed that work, that we would then turn our attention to increasing sampling scope and frequency, essentially the amount of data collected to address customer needs for improved precision, timeliness, coverage, and any special data collection needs not met by the broad survey. Some of our more recent accomplishments, as I think I spoke to you last year, we completed a new estimation method, a new method of estimating catch from the data we collect in the dockside interviews, the catch per trip data. That reduces sources of potential bias and increases accuracy. This was the most stinging criticism of the methodology, at least as far as the experts were concerned in the NRC reviews. It was the first thing we took on and took care of. We were able to re-estimate catch using that methodology back to 2004, and we also came up with a methodology based on a ratio estimator that enables the stock assessment folks to essentially recalibrate catch for years earlier than 2004 for purposes of establishing long-term catch rates for stock assessments. we are still hopeful that we may be able to actually do some actual re-estimates for earlier years, but right now that's on the back burner because of some higher priorities for staff time. The information team has done a lot of work to try to create as much access, transparency, and to explain the context of the technical decisions that we're making as they can do. And they've generated some new materials this year that are, I think, are kind of interesting. Within the last year, based on some extensive input they got from testing products with stakeholders, they developed a new overall MRIP presentation using the Prezi presentation software that is now on the front page of our new website. If you haven't had a chance to look at that someday and you want to have a cup of coffee and let the brain cells rest for a minute, I suggest you run through that Prezi. I think you'll find it informative, not just in terms of what we do, but in terms of how interesting that presentation methodology can be, and you might be able to adapt it for your use. My wife's a teacher, and she and her colleagues have fallen in love with it. Much better than PowerPoint. Much better. We've also been working this year with the states and with our contractor to develop some custom handouts, the materials that the field staff can hand to anglers and make available through tackle shops and upon request. That stuff's been out there now for most of the summer. We're hoping to get feedback on it from the state representatives that are at the WAVE meeting this week and continue to improve it. We did make available the offer to customize these materials for any of the states who wanted it done that way. Several states took us up on that, and the offer still stands for next year. So any of the states that would like to see these materials in a custom version for your use, let Leah Sharp know, or me, and we'll work with you to get that done. There is on our website, countmyfish.noaa.gov, if you go all the way to the right at the top and pick the outreach materials tab, you'll find basically every outreach product we've ever done is there. So it's easy to go on there and see what's available or what's been done for some of the states that have custom products. We're working on a couple of new videos. We've done a number in the past, but the two we're working on right now, we're getting close. One is a day in the life of a sampler, if you will. It helps to illustrate the new sampling protocols that we've put in place this year, and that was shot with the cooperation of Lou Daniels' staff at North Carolina Marine Fisheries. And another one they're working on is part of a broader effort to provide essentially a data user's manual for our catch data and to make it more user-friendly and to give people a better idea about how to access the data they might want, and that will be accompanied by a data user's video. The big news this year was the completion of the new intercept design. I talked to you about that, I think at least twice in the past, about this time last year in the spring. And I'm not going to go into all of the changes, just to point out that they've been undertaken now. We've got 3 major sample waves under our belt, and we're continuing to assess the effects of that. There are some issues that have arisen in implementation. It hasn't been as smooth as we would have hoped, and we're continuing to manage that implementation process. And there's several things that we've done, and several more that are on the way. Initially, we found right away that the sample draw program is a computer program that's created to draw sampling assignments from the site assignment register and match it with availability of staff to create assignments that can be done, as well as those that are statistically validly selected. The initial draw program didn't work well. It had to be completely redone, so a new sample draw program was developed early on, and it has proved to be very efficient, flexible, and robust, and it's a very substantial improvement. There were also some issues and concerns that are ongoing about efficiency. The new design has resulted in some decreases in the number of angler intercepts, which we expected, but also some further decreases increases in the proportion of assignments that don't collect any data, which is not something we want to see, and this generally less of efficient use in some cases of the interceptor's time. The field staff may have in not being able to leave an inactive site and go to another site. They end up in some instances being unproductively sitting on a site for a period of time. Part of that's an artifact of the design that can't be corrected, but some of it can be, and we've been working aggressively with the states this year to do it, and we've substantially improved the efficiency and the performance so far with changes that we've made, at least insofar as the shore and private boat modes are concerned. We have more work to do that will affect the charter boats. Probably need to change the time blocks and the way we cluster sites, but that needs to be done next year when our new intercept survey contract begins as a contract modification. We couldn't do it this year under the current contract. And we need to, we talked somewhat with some of the states about this, we need to maintain that dialogue and make sure that we're doing a better job of communicating the reasons for these things and the workings of these things at the state working staff level. There's a big takeaway from yesterday's luncheon meeting. We get that, and we're going to work on that. One of the points I want to make to each of the states is that in the future, our wave meetings, the meetings we hold every couple of months to review the information that is generated in the preliminary estimates for that 2-month period, are going to become more and more important as a vehicle for communicating at a technical level on survey methodologies, survey operational and implementation issues, and things of that nature. In the past, they were largely a get-together to review reams and reams of numbers. In the future, they're going to be more and more focused on the substance of the survey workings. And it's very important for the state technical staff to get to those meetings, and we will continue to provide funding through ACCSP to support the travel, and we're hoping that you can find, and I know what you go through, believe me, because I've done it, the means to get your staff approved to travel to get to these meetings, but it really is going to be important. I would also highlight the fact that I think that the ACCSP Rec Tech Committee meetings will become equally important in the same way. Just as an example, one of the pieces of feedback we got earlier this year is that the state survey management staff in some states felt that they didn't have a sufficient grasp on the mechanics of the methodology for weighting our data and incorporating the sample weights into the estimates. I mean, that's way down in the weeds. I don't understand it and don't want to try, but some of the state people felt that they needed more, they needed to understand that better. So at the WAVE meeting that's going on this week up in Maryland, John Foster from our staff put together a presentation on the weighting and estimation methodology that he presented to that group, and we'll see what kind of feedback we get from that, but that's an example of the kind of communication we need to have. These things are going to become a little bit like your technical committee meetings, I guess is what I'm saying. But the technical subject material will be survey operations and design. So we're going to continue to work on that, and hopefully we'll continue to get better with it going forward, and maintain communications with you all about that. You should have gotten, the state directors should have received about 4 or 5 months, maybe less than that, 3 or 4 months ago, a newsletter from Leah that kind of summarized some of what I just said at a high level. This week, the MRIP newscast came out, which I hope all of you are on the mailing list to get, and again, it addressed the same issue. So this issue of management initiatives we're undertaking to improve the efficiency and the performance of the intercept survey. We'll continue to try to keep you up to date in that way. And if you're not getting the newscast, this is an advertisement for it. leah.sharp@noaa.gov. Get to Leah, get on the mailing list, because that's how you can stay up to date. there's a lot of interest in this issue of going to charter boat logbooks and head boat logbooks in the for-hire sector. Thank you. We know just in recent months we've become aware of interest in the South Atlantic Council and the ASFMP Rec Tech Committee of creating working groups to explore logbooks. A couple of the states are moving in that direction. I think fairly recently, New York became the third or fourth state to go to mandatory logbooks, and I know that North Carolina's taken a hard look at it as well. Northeast Logbook program has been discussed forever, this issue of why do we have the logbook program and the other for-hire survey intercept program, subjecting the charter boats to two different data collection methods, and we're only using the data from one to generate estimates. And that discussion is ongoing, and it is one that eventually will probably get sorted out one way or the other. Now, as I said, we distributed two fact sheets that will get into the material I'm about to cover pretty much in depth, and hopefully we can have a little time to discuss the follow-ups to that. All this started with the NRC panel's recommendation that the for-hire industry be handled, if you will, in the data collection context in the same fashion as the commercial industry, with mandatory universal logbook trip reporting that should be done electronically, should be trip-based, and catch accounting done in that fashion. We went through a series of decisions and studies to tee that up, that the operations team and the for-hire working group that was convened under it managed their way through to get to a point where several years ago a major year-long pilot project of trip reporting in the charter boat industry in the Gulf of Mexico, and the areas involved in that included the Florida Panhandle and the Port Aransas area of Texas, participated in this pilot project. For federal permit holders in that area, a ruling was issued out of the Southeast Fisheries Science Center that made reporting and participation in the project compulsory for those permit holders. So it wasn't that they had an option, they were required to. However, the only sanction that was available under the rule that was in place was that their permits could not be renewed if they did not submit the required logbooks. And so for those who were in arrears, once they submitted their backed up logbooks, they could get their permit. So just, a summary of some of the findings they had. I think what we generally would say is that in this context of a logbook report attempt to achieve a census of catch in a fishery, there's three things we need the participants to do. We need them to submit the reports they're required to submit. We need to submit them on time, whatever the timing is. In this case, it was weekly. And we need the data that they submit to be accurate. It needs to be complete and accurate as to what they report about their trips, where and when, and the catch on their trips. In the instance of the pilot project, at the end of the day, they really didn't achieve all three of these. They did achieve general success on submission of reports. The proportion of vessels that were in compliance with the submission requirement grew over time, and of course jumped at the end of the year. And the panel felt that they could eventually get everybody submitting reports with the mechanisms that were available to them. However, they were not successful in getting the reports submitted in compliance with the timing requirements. They were not successful in getting the data submitted to match closely to the dockside validation observations of either the effort or the catch information. It did match compared to the whole fleet, but on a vessel-by-vessel basis, it didn't match very well. Study therefore verified that a strong and independent and effective validation program is absolutely key to trying to make a logbook reporting program work. They also concluded, the study team concluded that they saw the potential for a program of this nature to benefit a regional management program, perhaps more than a small scale or a limited geographic area. Some of the insights that they gained really, really important is that we got a picture of the resource commitments that would be necessary to make a logbook program work on a regional scale, and they are formidable. It will take a lot of effort and money. They noted the very critical importance of having a reporting mechanism that has built-in quality control features to assure that, to, as much as possible, eliminate errors in reporting at the time the report is generated. But that needs to be done, and they emphasized, with work in collaboration and with the support of the industry. Compliance and enforcement mechanisms, additional mechanisms to that available to the survey would clearly be needed given the results that they achieved. And there are additional compliance enforcement mechanisms, of course, available. Kind of surprisingly and importantly, they determined that there is a strong potential to use the logbook data that was submitted in conjunction with the dockside validation data in some statistical combination to generate an estimator of catch that would be useful and accurate. And they commissioned a follow-up report by Dr. Mark Kaiser of Iowa State University to explore that in depth. And Dr. Kaiser's report has been completed and is in the final stages of peer review, but he did conclude that that he generated at least one way using Bayesian statistics in some completely incomprehensible fashion to do this, and that there might be others. But the fact is that there is hope that even if we can't achieve a census, that sufficiently satisfactory census, we could still use validation data and logbook data to generate an estimator of catch. So we're not at a point where we can just turn the key and move to logbooks, we don't think. We need, more work is needed. We need to do more work to address the issues that were identified in the study. And so until we're able to do that, we're going to continue to use the current surveys that are certified for use on the Atlantic and Gulf Coast, and that are in the Atlantic Coast in particular are the standard methodologies in the ACCSP standards, which is the for-hire telephone survey of captains to generate trip data, and the access point angler intercept survey to generate catch data for the for-hire mode. As we've noted, we have already generated improvements to the estimation and intercept design that will benefit the charter boat catch estimates. And in the case of the for-hire survey, we had already begun using a registry-based survey before MREP came along, and before that recommendation was generated for the other modes of fishing. So that's where we are for the time being, but we want to recognize that there is a need to continue the discussion and continuing to advance consideration of how we might get to logbooks. And our thinking on that is that, given the interest, is to convene a regional dialogue in the key regions, and right now it's the Atlantic Coast and the Gulf Coast, to conduct a coordinated exploration of the next steps, the partner willingness to address the issues that we'll identify here, and who will commit to doing what, including funding. We think that costing out what it would actually take in terms of time and money is a useful first step, and if a dialogue does ensue, we would encourage and support that. We suggest that ACCSP, as the single standard setting entity for the Atlantic Coast fishery Dependent Data Collection Programs is the appropriate entity to help manage and coordinate that kind of a dialogue. I think lastly, we would note that in the case of the Atlantic Coast in particular, this may not be a one-size-fits-all requirement. It may well be that what works best in the South Atlantic states might be different than what works best in the New England states, and we wouldn't rule out that possibility, and I wouldn't want to rule that out from the beginning. So hopefully that dialogue will occur, and we're certainly talking to ACCSP about that as well. Moving away from for hire and into the effort survey, the last major component that needs to be completed to address those fundamental design issues from the NRC report is a replacement for the Coastal Household Telephone Survey. A year ago, I told you that we were concluding a year-long pilot project that in the coming months, and embarking on another one that we felt would be the last pilot that we needed to do in order to get a final solution in place, hopefully in 2014. So we're now a year forward. We're about to release the report on that one that finished late last year, early this year, and we're in the last few months of data collection on the last big pilot project. And there is a fact sheet that's been distributed that kind of summarizes in a very kind of a high-level way where we are, and we're going to need to talk a lot more in the coming year about where we're going with the effort surveys. There is we're going to face the decision on what to implement, and the likelihood is that the new methodology will generate trip estimates that differ consistently from the trip estimates we've had in the past. We're going to need to make sure that we understand very, very completely the reasons for the changes and what drives them, what sources of bias have we eliminated, and to be absolutely certain we don't have, as yet, unaddressed sources of bias in the new methodology. And that's going to take us a little bit longer and some really high-powered expert help. And we're going to have to address the consequences in a stock assessment and management context of having trip estimates producing trip estimates that differ from the old ones. That's been done before, and I think probably the for-hire survey was one example, and the re-estimation was another. But I think in this particular case, we expect this to be somewhat more challenging than those earlier efforts at essentially, for want of a better word, and I don't like it, but I don't have a better one, recalibrating our historic legacy estimates. Annually we do an implementation plan update for MRIP. That was just issued at the end of September, and due to the shutdown, I don't know if it got up on the website yet, but it'll be up there imminently if it's not yet. There will be a newscast issued next week that announces the availability of the update. The updates basically summarize accomplishments from the past year and lay out priorities team by team for activities in the upcoming fiscal year. The first slide identifies some of the operations team priorities for further projects and further methodology development. Press issued the request for proposals for FY14 projects back in August, I think, wasn't it, Press? Mm-hmm. And those, we had to delay the delivery date because of the shutdown, but project proposals are due tomorrow. And the operations team will meet in Jacksonville in the 19th and 20th, I think, of November to review the proposals and make recommendations for funding for next year. As I said earlier, there's not much hot news on the registry front. The basic thing is that we're working with the states to complete their data quality improvement plans. All of the states should have gotten or will be getting letters from us. You've all gotten your data evaluations from our technical staff. You should be getting letters from me, if you haven't already, advising you about the need to complete the data quality improvement plan within 6 months, and we'll do at least one more round of registry grants to help states fund any improvements that they need financial help with as a result of those plans. I think we've gotten 2 plans in so far that I know of. The first one from Georgia, no surprise. Kathy was the first to deliver, and I would say it's a magnificent job, and you're going to be getting a letter from us very shortly to that effect, Spud, but she did a great job on it. And I have nothing really substantively to say back to you about it. And I think we have one from Florida that we're overdue to report back on. So,
one from ACCSP also.
Yeah. Information management team, just a couple of highlights from their stuff. We're really working on improving documentation of metadata. That's an agency-wide and an office-wide proposal, but or policy, but that'll also be applied to MRIP. As I mentioned, we're developing user guides, including a video to help make it more easier to use the data available on our queries tool. An important new thing is the development of a new comprehensive integrated for hire vessel directory for next year. There'll be an improvement and hopefully close some of the gaps in the one we use now for the for hire survey. Communication education team, we've been doing a lot of work with field trips, road trips, outreach product development for the Atlantic and Gulf Coast states. We really want to give some attention to the Pacific Coast states next year. A lot of the team's attention will be given to supporting the release of the Angler Effort Survey and the next steps discussions there, and to work with us. We want to do a directed outreach effort to the for hire industry on the Atlantic and Gulf Coast that will dovetail with the dialogue we hope will occur on charter boat logbook development. And lastly, the Executive Steering Committee is focusing its attention now on implementation of MRIP developed designs and improvements, and those next steps going beyond of making decisions about investment in expanded data collection. We've said from the beginning that we won't have a one-size-fits-all program, that we'll develop methodologies, put them in a toolbox, and make decisions about which ones we use that are best adapted to the region, to each region, and try to make informed decisions, evaluating trade-offs on investments for improvements beyond the base. In July of this year, the Executive Steering Committee held a workshop to discuss this issue in more depth and to try to address the question, what kinds of decisions are we going to have to make looking forward, and who makes them? If we have alternative methodologies available for use, and the best example, clearest example I can give you is, let's assume we get to a certified for-hire logbook program that will be available for use alongside the for-hire survey, intercept survey methodology presently in use. How does a region choose? Who chooses? And once you put a base program in place, what should MRIP's role be in helping regional partners meet these expanded needs for sampling to improve precision, timeliness, coverage, et cetera? And assuming we can't cover them all, which is a pretty safe assumption, how do we make the choices? What are the priorities? And what's the process for doing that? And this is what it came together to discuss. The workshop report is on our website. I think we get a newscast out on it over the course of the summer, and it will be a chapter in the implementation plan. But basically, the recommendation is that we continue the same basic structure that we have now, whereby the Executive Steering Committee would be maintained, the role of the operations team would be broadened to support implementation as well as development, which is what we've been working on up till now. and that the main role at the national level will be for MRIP will be to develop and certify methodologies, establish national standards, best practices, and to provide such funding as we have to support the implementation of certified methodologies around the country and to help set priorities. The ESC would and its supporting team structure would be looked at as a national team that has that fundamental role, and we would look to the FINs and their equivalents in the non-FIN regions in the Caribbean and the Western Pacific as regional teams that would be the entities that, as partnerships, would make choices about which methodologies to employ, identify priorities for enhanced data collection, and communicate back to MRIP what the needs were, and try to work together with us in making the choices we need to make. Press's team is inheriting the inevitable, unenviable task of trying to assess those needs coming back from the regions comprehensively and maintain a continuously updated assessment and make recommendations to the ESC about where they see the priorities fitting overall. So our budget's gone up about $10 million, and now it's fallen back the other way to about $9 million last year, and we're not sure what this year. Well, it's not that we have no money. We have some. We got to figure out how to best invest it. Some of it will be invested in addressing the increased costs of implementing the new methodologies for the surveys we're already paying for. The new intercept survey is more expensive than the old intercept survey. The new effort survey that replaces the CHTS is going to be more expensive. Those costs have to be met, but at the end of the day, and we need to maintain some funding long-term for maintaining the methodological development progress. We can't abandon that. We're not going to ever be done. But we will have some funds left over at the end of the day that hopefully we can build over time if we can demonstrate success to Congress. And we need to figure out where and how to invest those funds among competing regional needs. And that's the process that's been identified here. There are a couple of tables in here that come out of the strategy. I'm not going to go through those. Those are there for your reference, but they try to identify to some degree the roles of this regional and national team as the ESC envisioned it. I think the last point I'll just make is I actually had this slide up last year. We're not in bad shape on the Atlantic coast in terms of identifying needs and setting standards. We have a little more to do. We're in better shape than some of the other regions are. And we look forward to continuing to work with the states and with ACCSP to address and prioritize these needs. One thing we do want to do, and again, we talked to some of the states about this yesterday, is to plan a workshop, hopefully for early next year, but we'll see. And we'll work with Bob and Mike on that, to bring the states together in a needs assessment context. The example I'll give you is not an Atlantic Coast example, but it's one that is timely and very clear. Gulf red snapper. Gulf red snapper, we have learned and we have become convinced recently that the current way that Gulf red snapper are being managed and the way they're going to be managed requires data that we can't reliably produce, or at least not in sufficient precision and timeliness to meet the needs of the managers. They're managing a very intense pulse fishery with a very short season. And it's so intense that they're shooting way over their catch limit sometimes, months before anybody knows it, and it's creating havoc. So talking to the partners down there, talking to the states, we've determined we need to try to see if we can develop a specialized survey, something different that would supplement the basic survey that we do that gets to the long-term annual catch estimates that focuses on that pulse fishery. Next week we're going to have a workshop in New Orleans to sit down with the states, the council, and our Southeast region NIMS folks to put some ideas on the table about survey designs that address that, and have our expert consultants evaluate them and identify those things that can be further developed and pilot tested. And that's the kind of thing that we see as the kind of need that we would see as being identified in the workshop. Is there a need for that sort of thing? And as well as some of the things we talked about at lunch yesterday in terms of perhaps some unmet needs for biological data collection that states may need for stock assessment, and how do we get at that sort of thing. All of that kind of thing is what we'd want to do in the workshop. So, Mr. Chairman, I'm going to stop finally, and we'll take as many questions as you will permit.
Nothing like a good MRIP discussion at 4 in the afternoon, huh? Any, no questions for our guest, I hope. No. Oh, go ahead, Adam. Sure.
Thank you very much. Appreciate you being here today, both Gordon and Press, on the work that's been done. I think you just touched on the first issue I was going to ask about, and that would be the events of the last 6 weeks, specifically with Louisiana withdrawing from the program effective 2014. I think that what you just touched on was probably a start to that. Was wondering if there was anything else you might want to detail with that to give us some insight in what that might mean to MRIP, how it might be affect other planned operations, or where you're going with that. And then after you have a chance to respond to that, I wanted to ask a question about your plans for participation. You talked a lot about effort, but I'll follow up with that. I'll give you a chance to touch on that Gulf issue first.
Yeah, in the Gulf, it's quite a different situation down there than it is on the Atlantic coast. So on the Gulf Coast, the 4 states, Louisiana, Alabama, Mississippi, and Florida, have historically performed the intercept survey work and the telephone calls for the for-hire survey by the state fishery management agencies. Unlike on the Atlantic coast, where this is done by a contractor who may subcontract with the state or may not, down there the funds all go directly to the Gulf States Marine Fisheries Commission, and they then parcel them out to each of the 4 states, and they put the field staff in the field to do the work. They collect the data, they send it back to the Gulf State Commission office, they compile it, edit it, and send it up to our office for estimates. In August, the agency, not MRIP and not our office, received an email from Louisiana that said that they had decided that effective next year, they didn't want to do that work anymore, and were developing their own survey that they hope to use. We're engaged in a continuing discussion with Louisiana about that decision, but the bottom line is that we have an obligation to maintain a data collection program through that 4-state area that will continue to provide a consistent time series of catch estimates for recreational catch that is required for the stock assessment and federal management process. So what may or may not happen with Louisiana, I don't know. We're actually meeting with them next week for the first time to see what design they have in mind and to assess its consistency with the sample design and the likely consistency of the estimates that they might produce with such a design, and then we'll take it from there. But the bottom line is that we're not likely to fund a data collection program that isn't using MRIP certified designs or doesn't continue data collection that generates estimates that we will think consistent with the time series. And we've heard that already pretty much. I think the Science Center director down there has been pretty emphatic about the need for that as well. So that could mean that the money that we've used in the past to support Louisiana's effort would be used to support a contractor effort in the state, which may or may not run parallel to one that the state's doing. And that might not be a bad thing, because we might have an opportunity to kind of pilot test and compare two different designs and see how they work. I don't know. But that's where we are, and that's above and beyond the red snapper thing. The red snapper thing is a separate issue that's focused directly on the question of what can we do to help the management community down there generate estimates that are more usable to them in the context of how that fishery works, whereas the Louisiana decision is for the broad everything kind of thing.
Thank you. I appreciate that. And then you talked a lot about effort. You presented a lot about that in reviewing where you are with an implementation plan. Can you provide some input as to what work is being done on the participation component? And specifically, when I look back at historical MRFs numbers, those numbers were approximately 5 times what certain states saw in license sales or other registry activities with regards to participation. What we're seeing now with the MRIP reported participation numbers is in some states, New Jersey in particular is averaging 250 to 300% of a participation number above what our registry shows. And in looking at North Carolina license sales, I see their participation numbers are of the same magnitude. So what does that mean? How are we going to reconcile this? I know that you don't even have New Jersey's registry data yet. So once you start incorporating that, how are you going to reconcile the participation numbers currently being reported with existing state license and registry data moving forward?
Okay, that's a long question, and it's going to be a long answer with many parts. But let me just address the last thing first. We do have New Jersey's registry data. They submitted their data last year to us. We reviewed it, evaluated it, sent back the report. Brandon hasn't got my letter yet. It's sitting on my desk at home, ready to be signed, and he will be. But Scott Sowery has sent the data quality evaluation report in, and I think Joe Purcell is talking to the staff about the next round of transmissions and trying to make that more and more frequent. So that's being done everywhere. But let me back up to the issue of participation. First thing and foremost, this is really, really important and fundamental. We don't use participation estimates in any way, shape, or form to generate catch estimates. Catch estimates don't come from participation estimates, they come from trip estimates. So any changes that you see or discrepancies or unusual things or things that don't compare to other data sets that you see on participation estimates don't have anything to do with catch estimation, point one. Point two, how do we use participation estimates? For the most part, they're not used in catch estimation at all, but they may be used in some instances in stock assessment. But the primary use of them is in some of our economic studies, where the number of participants might get multiplied against a survey-generated cost per participant to come up with a total estimate of expenditures, for example. But that's basically it. Now, thirdly, why would our participation estimates necessarily differ from the number of licenses that states might issue or registrations that states might issue? One of the key findings, and I talked about this last year, but I'll emphasize it again, one of the key findings of our effort survey pilot projects to date is that many people who fish don't get fishing licenses, and it is for that reason that we have not been able to develop and certify a methodology that simply uses the license registries alone as the survey sample frame. And I think it actually says that in that fact sheet in some way that went around today, but I'll emphasize it again. In many states, there's our Louisiana included, I think, we saw as many as 60% of the people we talked to who said they were fishing who didn't have fishing licenses, who weren't on the state's registry list. And that's not just a matter of of, exceptions to the licensing requirement based on age or fishing on a charter boat or something else. That's people who needed a license don't have one. So that's another thing. But all that, bear in mind, we are not at all satisfied with the methodology that we use to generate participation estimates. There are some significant concerns with it, and we have found that it turns out to be a very complex problem and not one that can be simply addressed through application of the new weighted estimation methodologies. So, in fact, we have a separate team of consultants, including some independent experts, some folks from the Census Bureau and the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service that do their survey that generates different participation estimates, working together, and they have been for a couple of years, to try to develop and pilot test a couple of different approaches to generating participation estimates. Now, a lot of this information is on our website in the projects section, where there are reports on projects completed and projects in progress, and I can refer you to those, and I'd be happy to send you an email that identifies exactly where to go to get all those details. But the expectation is that we will be developing a new method for estimating participation that will be separate, largely separate from the effort survey and intercept survey that we generate those estimates from now.
Go ahead, Tom.
I understand the saltwater registry part of that and how the people don't basically register. But when you register a boat, you don't usually not do that because they check them, the boat registration's right on the boat when you see the intercept. So when you look at the boat registration numbers in, like, say, New Jersey, basically in 2004, we had 220,000 boats. Before Sandy, we had dropped to about 160,000 boats registered. And this year, and I'm only guessing because we're waiting for the figures to come out of the Department of Transportation, but we're probably down to 120 or 130,000 because 30,000 boats were damaged and lost, and a lot of people never put their boats in the water. So how does that, when we look at trips, and summer flounder is an example where most of those trips, because if you look at the surf fishing catch for summer flounder, it's very limited. So most of those trips are boat trips. If we look at a loss of almost 50% of our boats in the last 10 years, that should affect the number of trips, because there's a lot less boats. Maybe not all, maybe not 50%, but there should be a reduction. And when I look at the numbers from 2004, the numbers this year so far for the trips, it's just way higher than any number from 2004 on. So that's the one. I know the PSEs I know they're preliminary figures, but that's what I'm trying to figure out.
Tom, I looked at the New Jersey trips today, and the trips for Wave 4 were lower than they were last year. Not a lot, not as much as we probably would have thought, but they were lower. The private boat mode trips and the for hire trips were down by almost a third.
Yeah.
Now, that said, I'll just say this too, and I said this to you yesterday, I've said it to other people. Give those numbers a couple of weeks before you go back and look at them again, because we're still in the middle of the review process for that Wave 4 data set, and those numbers are likely to change. So there's no point in getting too deeply into them here today. Give that process time to complete. That's what those folks are doing up in Columbia. They're reviewing those numbers.
Okay.
I don't see any more hands up. All right, Doug.
I'll ask this. I've asked this before.
No need to.
Given all the challenges you have with the registry, does the executive steering committee have a goal of when they might have an effort-based survey based on the registry at this point?
Doug, I think realistically, we're talking about figuring out what methodology to employ during 2014, figuring out how to address its implications and get a plan in place to deal with that, recalibration and all that stuff, and to hopefully be ready for a startup at the beginning of 2015.
That is very positive. I'm glad to hear that. I won't hold you to it, but I'm glad you have a goal.
We do.
And the same thing with any potential charter boat logbook or for hire survey logbook. Are you looking in the same time frame? Or?
Not in that case, not really, because I think we need to kind of hand the dialogue off to the leadership, the regional partners. We have this process of sorting out what improvements would need to be made to get us to a certifiable methodology, and then cost it out and figure out who can do what is going to be a complicated one that many of us would have to be involved in. And I can't speak for all of us. It might take us no time at all, or we might decide right away, we're not going to go there. We're going to stick with what we got. Some of the folks, I was a little surprised, some of the leaders in the charter boat industry in the Gulf who were very supportive of going to logbooks, looking at the results of the pilot, are now saying maybe we should just stick with what we've got. So I don't think it's a foregone conclusion that we'd necessarily go there, but it's a discussion we need to have.
And Gordon will be sticking around until after the meeting if you have any more questions. But Gordon and Press, I appreciate you guys coming. Those were good questions. But believe it or not, we're going to talk about cancer crabs now. And,
sounds just as exciting.
Thanks, guys.
Thank you.
So there is a white paper. It was brought to our attention last time. I think, was it Steve Train? Steve did bring it to our attention last time. I think it may have come to us through the lobster board. I'm not sure. But nevertheless, Tony is going to present her findings, our staff findings.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. As Paul just said, the Policy Board received a FIP. As a reminder, a FIP is an industry-led initiative to develop and implement plans to improve the sustainability of fisheries. The FIP is being moderated by GMRI, and it's composed of buyers and sellers of crabs, scientists, and managers. David Borden is one of the members of the FIP, who is now Bill McElroy's proxy. And there are some members from the states, like Bob Glenn is also on the FIP, who is a Mass Lobster TC representative, as well as David Spencer, who is the LCMT 3 chairman for the commission. The goal is to enact a fishery improvement plan that would result in improved fisheries data and monitoring, as well as traceability efforts that enable product differentiation in the market. So the board asked me to put together a white paper that outlines the cancer crab fishery. And remember that cancer crabs include both Jonah and rock crabs. There's very limited life history information on these crabs, and there is not a current assessment. The range is from Newfoundland to Florida, from the intertidal to about 750 meters. Jonah crab are believed to migrate, but the Jonah's migration is more limited compared to rock. There are very few maturity studies from what is reported. It's believed that females are mature around 89 millimeters carapace width and males about 128 millimeters carapace width. The Jonah crab's landings are majority bycatch in the lobster fishery, while there is an increased directed fishery on Jonah crab. The landings data is uncertain due to the confusion of the species, and it's not in the confusion of the actual identification of the species, but it is in what we call them. The common name for Jonah crab is often rock crab, and the common name for rock crab crab is often sand crab. And so then when the information gets reported, Jonah crabs can be reported as rock crab, so therefore the landings information is deemed uncertain. Typically, rock crabs are harvested in inshore waters and Jonah crab in offshore waters. Because there is very little detailed landing information on the two, I can't say that definitively through data, but that is the information that I got from most of our fisheries biologists. So here we have the landings of of cancer crabs in the North Atlantic, which includes Maine through Connecticut, and the Mid-Atlantic, which is New York through Maryland. We do have sporadic landings in North Carolina as well as Florida throughout the time series, but I did not include them here because they are so few. I had to combine all of the landings in these two regions due to confidentiality of the data. In some of the states, there may only be one dealer that's reporting, but in the white paper, it does outline the increase in landings for the states, a couple of the states that are your big players, and I'll go over those. But you can see that we had this big spike in landings for both Jonah and rock crabs in 2002 to the current years, where we are in for Jonah crabs in the Mid-Atlantic, we are up above 12 million pounds, and for in the North Atlantic, we are almost at 12 million pounds for the Jonah crab. In the state of Rhode Island in 1990, they landed about 900,000 pounds of Jonah crab, and that was the largest state share. And Maine was second with around 400,000 pounds. And we saw Maryland, New Jersey, and New York starting to land less than about 22,000 pounds in that year. And then in 1994, we saw landings come in also from Delaware, New Hampshire, and Mass. Maine's landings dropped below 55,000 pounds, and then in more recent years, Maine's landings of rock crab dropped from 2 million pounds in 2004 to 1 million pounds in 2012. Rhode Island and Mass have seen the largest increase in the crab landings in recent years. Rhode Island went from 900,000 pounds of Jonah crab in 2004 to over 3 million pounds in 2012. And Massachusetts went from 900,000 pounds in 2004 to over 7.5 million pounds in 2012. The ex-vessel value has also increased in these species with the increased landings since 2002 to recently. The Jonah crab boat prices has risen from about 50 cents to 70 cents per pound in 2009 to 2012, but rock crab prices have remained around the same, approximately 45 cents per pound since 2006. Where we've seen a substantial increase in price is from the Jonah crab products, and I think that from what I've read, that is when we've seen the increase of Dungeness crabs, and that these crab can be a replacement or an alternative for Dungeness crab, and those prices have increased. And so we see in 2012 the price for meat that's been processed is around $13 to $15 per pound. In terms of the different types of management measures that are out there are indirect management measures in several of the states, either through harvest methods. So, for example, in federal waters, in order to have a trap that can catch lobster, it has to be licensed. You have to have a licensed fisherman. That trap has to have a tag, and there are trap limits for the number of lobster traps. So since most of the Jonah crab crabs are coming in as bycatch, you're sort of regulating indirectly there. If an individual's vessel does not have a lobster license, though, they can go out and set as many traps as they want, as long as they do not bring in any lobster. And so there has been stories told of individuals bringing in crab, passing off the lobster to a vessel that does have a lobster license that they catch in the traps, and then coming in. So that could be it could be deterring the efforts of the lobster management plans, having all of these additional Jonah crab pots out in these recent years as we've seen this increase in landings. There also are states that have landing licenses. So in the states of Maine, New Hampshire, and Mass, you have to have a license to land crab, so that does help. As well as in the state of Mass, there is a closed season for edible crab, and the cancer crabs are part of that. The market dictates the size of the crab. Most of the landings are large females, and those are for claws, but they do land the entire crab. And there is a small market for dining crab that are used in bait, mostly in the lobster fishery. I'm not sure what the size that the market has dictated. I've tried to get that from a couple different people, and no one could give me an approximate size. So with the increase in catch and effort in the crab fisheries, there are questions that are being raised about its long-term sustainability. For a species, resiliency is only to exploitation is dependent on all of its life history parameters. Unfortunately, for these species, we don't have an answer to a lot of those parameters. The Fishery Improvement Project is developing a work plan that will hopefully bring forward management recommendations. They're using the 30 MSC standards to develop that work plan, and they are hoping to have that work plan come forward for the February commission meeting. It's staff recommendation to wait to see what that work plan has in terms of management measures and moving forward before we make any final decisions on management plans, because that work plan is supposed to contain a very thorough look at the species beyond what I've prepared here for you today. And it also does include recommendations that will be developed by industry members as well as biologists and managers.
Okay, so that's the preview, and it seems that we're not ready to make a decision about this today, whether or not this becomes a separate plan or a plan of a portion of the American lobster management plan, or do we continue as we have been and ignore it in a sense. It seems from what you've said that it's a sizable fishery and it's becoming more important for a number of reasons in recent years. So I think we're going to hear more about this, obviously. And the Fisheries Improvement Program, can you refresh my memory on what is that?
So the fishery improvement plans are, it was started, I believe, by the Hannaford Market. They do not sell any product or seafood product that is not sustainably managed. And so I believe that they came forward to GMRI to see if they would moderate a fishery improvement plan, which works with buyers, sellers, managers, and biologists to put together a sustainable harvest plan for a species.
Okay. So what would your recommendation be for the next step for this body?
I think that the next step to wait to see what comes out of that fishery improvement plan. I'm hoping that they invite me to, or some member of the commission to their final working plan that that brings forward their management recommendations so that I have a good understanding of what they are thinking about putting forward so that I can explain that to the policy board when it's finished. And in talking with Jen Levine, who is the GMRI person that is working on this, she's hopeful that it'll be completed by February, as was David Borden when I spoke with him about it yesterday.
Okay, so I hope that the board is comfortable with that strategy. It sounds reasonable to me, and I don't see any disagreement. So thank you, Tony. Go ahead, Bob.
Tony, I'm just trying to get my head around this. What would explain the surge in landings if most of the crabs are caught with lobster traps and the number of active traps fished has been decreasing?
I think with the increase in the increase in need for alternative crab product has brought on that surge is one of the things that I read about. I'm not sure what the other rationale would be. I know that in speaking with David Borden, a lot of industry use this as supplemental money to make sure they have ends meet, especially with the reductions in the lobster fishery. The gional crab are significant in the offshore fleet, and rock crab are much more significant inshore.
Just a quick follow-up. So is it clear, or is it still up in the air as to whether the population is increasing or they're just bringing more crabs home?
I do not have an answer. It could be both, or it could just be one.
Yeah. Bill, did you want to shed some light on something to that point?
At certain times, the offshore fleet, they concentrate on crabs out there, and their catch of lobsters is down, and so the main landing is crabs at certain times of the year. Inshore, there are certain times when there's a lot of crabs in your trap, and then it seems that when the lobsters move in, the amount of crabs that show up in your trap goes down. And I don't, we used to use crabs a lot for bait. We just take them, put them right on the spike. But at least what I've been listening to more frequently is we don't need that stuff. We don't need the crabs to be spiked and used for bait, although I'm sure some people do. That's not a big thing. So I would think that the big increase in crabs is coming probably from the time when, particularly offshore, although this happens sometimes in inshore too, but when lobsters aren't running around too freely, but the crabs are, and the major landings by these offshore boats are crabs.
Okay. All right. So we're gonna talk a lot more about cancer crabs as we move forward. Thank you, Tony. Yep. So now I think you're going to present a similar report for the Shad and River Herring Management action.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Because we did not have a Shad and River Herring Management Board meeting, but the Mid-Atlantic Council took some action, and we've had a couple other things going on with Shad and River Herring. We're bringing this report to the Policy Board since it's a coast-wide board. So both the Mid-Atlantic and the New England Fishery Management Council has put in place catch caps since the last time the Shad and River Herring Management Board has met. The Mid-Atlantic put in a 236 metric ton cap on incidental river herring and shad catch in the Atlantic mackerel fishery for 2014, and the New England Council put in a 312 metric ton proposed closed on gear types when 95% of the cap for the gear type is reached. And that 312 is the total amount. It's all broken down by gear type specifically. The Mid-Atlantic Council also had a draft DEIS to consider shad and river herring as stocks in the fishery as part of the squid, mackerel, butterfish plan, but they did not enact that. Instead, they passed this motion that is up on the screen that basically says to put together a working group that is made up of the council, the commission, states, the regional office, the regional center working group to improve the current management by aligning current commission, state, and at-sea cap management measures to comprehensively address fishing mortality throughout the species range in both state and federal waters. Second, to use the councils, the Mid-Atlantic councils, SSCs, both the Mid-Atlantic and New England, and other relevant scientific bodies to develop a scientific-based approach to determining the proper size of the catch cap in the mackerel and herring fisheries. And thirdly, to monitor the success of current management actions by the council and our partners. So this is the action that they took at the last council meeting instead of including shad and river herring as a stock in the fishery. NOAA Fisheries has also put together a technical working group that is developing a long-term and dynamic conservation plan for river herring throughout the species range. They have asked us to sign on to a letter requesting that states bring forward an expert to participate in this working group, and without objection, then we would sign on to that letter to reach out to the states for that from the policy board. And lastly, the ASFFP has put together a multi-region webinar to prioritize river herring habitat restoration projects. And these will be on the ground restoration project, and it's sponsored by NIFWIF, which is a part of their river herring initiative. So as you can see, there's three fairly significant working groups that are going on concurrently in the upcoming year, focusing on shad and river herring. And it's staff's recommendation to work with commission leadership in supporting all three working groups, but also to make sure that we avoid duplicate efforts of these groups and to prioritize commission work when necessary, if that is the pleasure of the policy board.
Okay, go ahead. A couple of questions. Go ahead, Dave.
Yeah, I was present when the Mid-Atlantic Council voted on this motion, to help us manage river herring, and I have some concerns. I really don't think it's consistent at all with Amendment 2 or 3. I don't think it's consistent with the history this country has of managing anadromous fisheries. They're taking a single stock type of approach and saying we can calculate an ACL and we'll decide how many we get and how many you get, and that's completely contrary to the sustainable fisheries plans that we all just developed in order to keep runs open. And I'm sure, well, that's the main point. I just don't think it's consistent at all with the history of anadromous fisheries management in the country, and it's not consistent with our plan. So I might thank them for their effort, but I would rather that they took a hard look at their intercept fishery and do as the New England Council did and look at ways to mitigate the impact they have on our runs. Not close their fisheries, certainly, but mitigate it. Take steps necessary to reduce, to the extent practicable, their interception of American shad, alewives, bluebacks, and I think hickory shad are also included. So that's my strong preference here.
Okay, Bill Adler.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I agree with David because I don't like him to use the word help us manage. You know what that means. We get the SSC involved and we get the federal thing, and then we might as well give up our plan because it seems that every time we have a joint thing, we always have to agree with them. You've heard this before. So I'd prefer, and particularly because this particular species has a lot of contact with up the rivers, and I would prefer to leave it to our management operations. Like I think David was heading in that direction. Thank you.
Okay, I don't see any other questions. Oh, go ahead, Tom.
I have I'm torn on this. I look at what New England's done on winter flounder compared to what we've done on winter flounder, and I'm looking at what I think is still a high level of bycatch of river herring and shad, and my state completely closed down, so it wouldn't make any difference to us. And, to rely on what New England's done and say they're doing everything right, I'm not sure that it is. So, I think the Mid-Atlantic was looking at to try and help us rebuild these stocks and looking at how to reduce the bycatch and the discard rate on this in other fisheries. And I'm not ready to throw it out and not ready to come out against it, especially what I've seen, again, on winter flounder, where we have very small seasons and very short catches, and I see the catches up north going up, and I don't know.
I've got Pat and then Bill, and I guess first I want to say that, what strikes me is that, yeah, they're recommending a working group. But at the same time, they've quickly recommended that they lead this working group, and that suggesting that the expertise on anadromous fisheries lies within the Mid-Atlantic Fisheries Council, and I do disagree with that. So I think there needs to be more discussion with the council about how that working group, if it develops, should proceed. But I'll take your comments, Pat, and then Bill's, and then we'll see where we're going to go with this.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. All of this turned out to be, I was at the same meeting David was and several others, this is almost a knee-jerk reaction to the effort that the council has put into possibly ending up developing a herring FMP all by themselves. And there was movement in that direction, and it was pushed real hard, and there was some bitterness at the end of it because it wasn't, the whole thing wasn't approved. It was kind of shot down by 1 or 2 votes. I think maybe the chairman actually made the last vote. You're right, Mr. Chairman. This then again abdicates our authority to do what we do and leave what we're doing. And therefore, I would not support this. But I like the idea of the follow-on, Tony, that you put up there, that National Marine Fisheries Service is interested in forming or has formed or will form a group. And if there's any to be done, it seems to be the combination of their efforts and our efforts, with us still having to lead because it's our FMP. Thank you.
Bill, and then I'll go to Bob.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I was at that council meeting as well, and I want to echo Dave Simpson's view of it. This commission, since a shad benchmark assessment, I want to say about 15 years ago, has taken the view, if not longer than that, has had the view that alosted stocks needed to be managed on tributary-specific basis. And we, to that end, we phased out the coastal intercept fishery in states' waters effective in 2006, I believe. And of course, we've closed many of our river herring fisheries now, only have a few open, I think. And a lot of the states have put a lot of effort into dam removal, as we all know, and fish passage. And I think what we have concluded in our many, several at least, letters to the councils and perhaps to NOAA as well, is that the states have done about all they can, and that these are historically very important fisheries and ecologically very important fisheries that are basically missing from our coastal ecosystems now. and that there's something else going on, even if we don't have really strong data. That's really the problem. We don't have really good data on the nature of the bycatch, but there's a lot of circumstantial evidence that it is a major problem and may actually be the final thing that's standing in the way of any kind of significant recovery. As I recall, the staff analysis at the council ranked dams obstructions to fish migrations as a bigger impact, most likely a bigger impact than offshore bycatch. And yet, I don't think they fully recognized all the effort that has gone into dam removal and fish passage in the last couple decades, mostly by states' efforts. And that actually in a previous era, several decades back, we had much stronger herring and shad runs with less historic spawning grounds available to them. In addition, they made a comparison to striped bass and said that, well, the ASMFC has proven its ability to recover an anadromous stock, and they cited striped bass, implying that, well, we ought to be able to turn around illustrated stocks without that kind of attention to offshore bycatch, was the implication I took from that as well. And again, I think that was a little short-sighted because it failed to recognize that, in fact, the striped bass recovery was a result of range-wide coordinated management, and these elusive stocks clearly extend their range well out into the EEZ. And if you want to take the striped bass comparison a step further, the federal government did close the EEZ to striped bass, so that would suggest the precedent would be for much stronger action than just making elusive stocks in those fisheries. So I think we should feel disappointed and frustrated. I'm not sure what step we should take, but I think it's a setback for our illicit restoration efforts.
Yeah. Thanks, Bill. Bob, I hope you're going to have a resolution. Go ahead.
A thought, if nothing else. I think the good news is everybody's realizing shad and river herring need some work. The bad news is we're kind of all tripping over ourselves trying to do something. And I think there's a number of different initiatives at the councils and NOAA fisheries and states, and I think there's a lot of moving parts and there's not a lot of coordination between those parts. The Northeast Region Coordinating Council's meeting, I believe it's November 20th. So then that's a body with the Commission, the Mid-Atlantic and New England Council, Northeast Regional Office of National Marine Fisheries Service. So they're meeting in a few weeks. I would suggest that, and Terry Stockwell will be there. Terry and I can kind of bring the message forward that we need to sort out all these initiatives and figure out, the best way to coordinate this and not, there's a lot of redundancy in the system right now, and there's a lot of, I think there's conflict with who's managing and what authority should take the lead, and I think somewhere at the between the two councils, the Commission and Northeast Regional Office, we can start the dialogue anyway at the Coordinating Council, and then bring it back to Commission leadership and see where folks want to go. But it seems like we're working too hard at this, or too many moving parts to get where we need to go.
Yeah, I agree. I think that there's something here. We certainly need to coordinate all these efforts, but again, I feel very strongly, and I think most of you do as well, that the leadership role in this, I think, belongs in ASMFC, because it's really the states that have, most of us at least, have statutory authority over regulating these anadromous fisheries and resources as they come up into the rivers. So that's been pretty well established going back to colonial times, and MSA never changed that. So, I think there's got to be some clarification if you want to do it at that meeting, but I don't think we want to forget about this before there's any action that comes out of following up on this motion. We want to make sure that we get on the field and
Yeah, I think that's fair. And I can bring that message to the coordinating council and see what their reaction is and let you guys know.
And I appreciate what Tony presented, that NOAA Fisheries is preparing a very large effort, it looks like, probably with funding. Who knows? I don't know.
$90,000. And
$90,000.
And we're doing that with them.
No, that's great. So, Dave.
Which one? Which one?
Yeah, the federal slide got by me, and I just wanted to see it.
And I did not say that it's a $90,000 initiative that we are working very closely with them to develop that, what goes on at those regional workshops to put together. And that was in direct response to the non-finding of the ESA listing.
Okay. Terry.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'll be very brief. Just to inform the board that the New England Council shares the sentiments expressed around the table.
Okay. All right. So this is another issue that we'll be talking more about. So thanks, Tony. Mm-hmm. And I see Madeline Hall-Auber is here and has joined us. Those of you who don't know Madeline, she's an anthropologist with MIT Sea Grants program. And I guess you're representing our Economic and Social Science Committee today, and you're going to give that report. Thanks, Madeline.
Thanks for inviting me to talk. Some of you may remember that over a year ago, maybe as long as 2 years ago, we sent out a survey of the commissioners to try to find out what kinds of economics and social science data you use in your decision making and what other data you would like to have that you don't. And so we sent it out to 45 commissioners, and about half of you responded. All 15 states were represented, and a lot of the people who actually filled out the survey were state staff. What we did was we analyzed the responses and did it on what they call Likert scale, which shows most important, least important. The most important was 5 and the least important 1, so it wasn't a huge range, but it gives you an idea. So when we asked what research areas contribute to the Commission's decisions, this is what came up. Now, it's not a huge surprise. Policy and law and economics top the list. As an anthropologist, however, I was a little sad to see anthropology and sociology so low on the list. But actually, as I went through the survey responses, it turns out that there were a lot of questions that were really anthropology and social science would answer those questions or decisions that had to be made. So I think maybe we need to do a better job of letting you know what information would be useful to you. So when it came time for the questions about what the states found were the most important pieces of data, again, it wasn't a huge surprise. Economics topped the list, and then attitudes towards proposed fisheries regulations, which includes values and goals, and I will point out this is social data. 3 was the effects of tradable quotas and catch shares and caps. Again, this is social and economic data intertwined. Then number 4 was the social effects of fisheries regulations, excuse me, and 5 was trends in fishing communities. One of our economists found this whole discussion quite interesting because he noticed that when the commissioners talked about the data that was important to the commission's decisions, only about 56% said economics, whereas when they talked about the state's decisions, it was more like 74% as being important or very important. And what he surmised is that because when you're dealing with the state, since most of you have much more knowledge about your local situation and the economics and what's important to you, that was why economics was so much more important than it was when you're dealing with all the states combined. And people rely on their own knowledge of their local area. So in New England, as in many parts of the world, the small-scale fisheries have started to disappear since management turned to individual tradable quotas, or ITQs. Even in the context of New England, where we have ground fish management and they use sectors, they call them catch shares, but in effect they're the same as ITQs. And there are many reasons for this, but consolidation and corporatization tend to follow ITQs. So herring is a fishery that many of you have been involved in, I gather, and you know that there are very diverse stakeholders. There are the small operators that are operating the local lobstermen for giving the bait, and then there are the large operators that are not only dealing with bait, but are also trying to jump into the food market, especially the foreign food market. So right now the quota is general. It's based on fishing areas. It's not applied to individuals or individual permits, individual boats. And so if you did switch, or if one switched to ITQs, you could conceivably have consequences that were not intended, like consolidation. And so many of the small operators, such as the whiting fishermen, who only rely on herring for a small portion of the year, and it's to make their year's pay, they might be impacted negatively. And this shows that you need both economics and social data in doing your analysis and coming to your decisions. And there's another thing where the ASMFC has made some changes for herring, for example, the landing days. Well, at one point, the landing days were 1 or 2 days out of the week, and when I did some interviews on what the impacts of those were, it was the short side businesses that were affected. It was like the truckers, because one of the dealers had to bring all of the trucks in to pick up the herring on that one day of the week that they were landed, and it was very tough to get enough trucks. So that kind of thing can have a greater impact on small operations, since they tend to be the day boats that don't have the capacity to hold herring in the RSW, so that their fishing as well as their landing is affected. Finally, the restrictions on herring, both federally and regionally, have led to lobstermen seeking alternative bait. Now, this could end up having an impact on the herring fishery because of the prices, the whole demand and supply issues related to that. So, as I said, economic impacts and social impacts are generally intertwined. You have economic consequences of management actions that lead to social consequences, and some of those might be the consolidation, which leads to fewer jobs, fewer crew positions, probably larger vessels, changes in schedules, etc. And partly because of the expense of permits, when you have an ITQ, you have fewer young entrants into the program, or into the fishing. I'm sure you're all keenly aware of the impacts of a lot of your allocation decisions. Attitudes is something that you don't always talk about, but it's something that's critically important, because research has found that if fishermen agree with the regulations, and they're more apt to agree if they actually participate in making the decisions about how they should be managed, they're more apt to abide by those regulations. So that's really quite important. Now, every time you make a management decision, there are impacts. And in the survey, a lot of you noted that it would be very helpful to have a comparison of what the impacts were depending on the kind of decision you made, or choices you made in your management plan. Now, ASMFC has a little more freedom, a little more maneuverability than the federal plans, because you're not absolutely required to have social and economic data, but clearly it is something that would be helpful. These are just some of the things that the survey, the responses to the survey noted would be useful. So we at the end of it, it was a very short survey, as you may recall, and not very very detailed, but we could honestly say that the commissioners are concerned about socioeconomic information. They do believe that it's important, and they are concerned about the impacts of their decisions. You're limited by funding. You're limited by access to information from reliable sources. Maybe limited by the way the analyses are presented. Maybe the models aren't as useful as they should be. And of course, there's always the time, we've talked about that already several times today, and political pressure. I did find the issue about access to information from reliable sources, a rather interesting comment, because in an interview I had with a federally managed, on the topic of a federally managed species, one of the managers told me that he does not read social impact assessments. I was pretty astounded. He said that instead he talks to a few people that he considers reliable. Now, I am sure that that same manager would not talk to two reliable scientists rather than going to look at the track or the other scientific assessments and consider that that was sufficient. He would want that science. Well, social science is also a science. You can get an impression from talking to trusted individuals, and you can even go to your technical committees or go to your social scientists on your staff and ask them to investigate. But just to take the word of an impression of a few people is probably not the best way to go. And so one of the things that we're hoping to do in conducting this survey and the follow-up is to find out what would be useful to you and how could we help you incorporate social science data on a scientific rather than an impressionistic basis. We do have economists on our committee who would really like to help you understand the differences between economic impacts and cost-benefit analysis, for example. Those are very pertinent to your decisions because they can be designed to achieve different goals. And your understanding of the differences between these are really important because you might have stakeholders who come up to you and call on one or the other kind of study to prove their point. And unless you're aware of the differences, you might make the wrong choice, the choice that isn't really equitable. And one example of that is there is a modified cost-benefit approach that does address equity and distributional impacts rather than just economic efficiencies. So we do have some follow-up questions, as you might imagine. And at first, I'll just call these rhetorical questions, just to have you look at these and think about it. And then I'll go on for the next couple of slides and go into a little more detail about what we think might be helpful. But basically, we're trying to find out where in the system and in your activities would be the most useful for us to get involved. We spend a fair amount of effort and don't want it just to be useless or sit on a shelf someplace. So some of the options are should CES and not just the CES but the technical committees as well. There are social scientists on most of the technical committees. They aren't necessarily all part of the CES, so that's why I have both the TC and the CES here. We think that with the FMP reviews, we could provide basic data, baseline data on the economic status of the fishery, for example. And that would be things like the current dockside and dealer prices, the markets, the products, current fleet capacity, numbers and sizes of vessels, ownership, et cetera. Then we can also look at existing community profiles and indicators that would give us an idea of the status quo. Now, you probably are already aware that the National Marine Fisheries Service now has been making a serious effort to put up community profiles, and they have a whole group of people working on indicators as well. It becomes very complicated but in any case, I don't know why I'm switching here. Anyway, what we're thinking is that for this baseline data, it would probably take a couple of months to put that together for any particular question that you had, any particular species. And it might be possible to get the CES or the TC people to do this on a pro bono basis, although I have not been able to run this by the committee since this idea came up, so don't take that as gospel. And then another place that we could interact is at the amendment or addendum point. And what we're thinking there is that we could provide data on the trade-offs between the different options. And that would give you projected socioeconomic impacts of regulations. Those are things like the trends in dockside dealer and market prices, fleet capacity, social variables indicating vulnerability or resilience, well-being, that kind of thing. That would cost a little money, and it would take a little more time. And then the third place that we think we might be able to have some impact is during the actual stock assessment development. And there we would like to see CES really give you much more comprehensive data. Socioeconomic impacts, not just of what the current status is, but your past actions, what has happened, a lot of people do social impact assessments, but very few people look back at what the real impact has been after all the regulations have been put in place. And here we would also want to talk about the impacts on landings, the trends and the prices, the capacity, user conflicts or cooperation, and community vulnerability or resilience, well-being, governance, all those kinds of things. Again, that would be a little more costly, a little more time, but I think it would be well worth it in the long run. So if any of you have comments or suggestions or ideas where you'd like to see this kind of information, how you would like to see this information used to help you with your decision making, that I'm all ears.
I don't see a lot of hands going up, but what strikes me here is that the investment, the cost, seems pretty modest compared to the amount of dollars that we're spending overall. And so I think that I would guess that there's an opportunity for here to take one or maybe multiple options and see where it leads us. So I'm not sure how to proceed today, but who has a question? Dave?
Yeah, I think this was great information, and I think, with the struggles we have with lobster management in southern New England, collapse of the stock, how do we respond to that? I think it's a really good case study of distributional impacts, as you called them, versus economic efficiency, and a little bit of social science economics assistance in looking down the road at what the outcomes of the consolidation measures we're implementing in areas 2 and 3, I think would be really instructive, because I understand that as an offshore fleet, but I look at my own state in Connecticut and the nearer shore type of fishery, and I'm thinking of going in a completely different direction so that we have Greenwich to Stonington, east to west, continue to have some kind of participation in lobstering on a broad scale, not just the 5 guys now that take up half of the landings. So I think it would really help us on lobster in particular.
So is that a recommendation to take these options and implement them in a case study type program over, say, a year. We pick, maybe it's the lobster fishery. I'd be fine with that, but we can have more discussion. Is that something that's doable, Bob, or is that?
Depends on if you pick ones that cost money, we have to put it into the action plan.
Right. Let's assume that it would cost some money, and but it looked like in total, it doesn't look like it's more. It's under maybe $20,000 to do this. Right. Go ahead.
Yeah, we're still wrapping up the action plan and the budget for next year, so we can, as we get closer to wrapping that up, I think we can come back to the board with, how much money we have available, what projects the board, and then work with the board and assess maybe to prioritize those projects and see what we can get done in the next calendar year.
All right. So why don't we do that? Why don't we have you come back, work with the committee, and come back with an estimate and a target plan, something that may not be lobster. Maybe we should pick one that's lined up perfectly with assessment timing and other an addendum and so forth.
It does have a stock assessment.
Okay, well, all right. So are there any other questions for Madeline? Go ahead, Lauren.
Yes, thank you for a very fascinating report. I was taking notes, and when you were talking about attitudes that fishermen have, I believe you said that if they agree with those attitudes, they tend to abide with them. Earlier this afternoon, we had a very interesting speaker who commented that sometimes he had seen where up to 60% of fishermen in certain states chose not to purchase fishing licenses. Could we extrapolate then that indeed they don't perhaps agree with the whole concept of a fishing license?
Since I wasn't privy to that, and I don't know which group it was that is, or what state, it is interesting that there are very local differences. You can have opinion leaders who will cause a whole group of people to do something or not to do something. So it's kind of a blanket statement that may not hold true in every case, that people who participate in the decision-making will actually abide by the regulations. But that's what the research has found. I don't know, maybe those people didn't participate.
Okay, Bill.
I think that's very true, and I'll use lobster. This group, unlike the federal council way back when we started to move into lobster management, this group, the Atlantic states, was willing to have the fishermen sit down to address a problem in their area, and they did. And I think to this commission's credit, when the fishermen presented their plan, which they had run through the scientists and everything about does it do the trick, that whole thing. When this commission adopted, for the most part, adopted what the fishermen had put in for their medicine, and I've spread this over and over to the fishermen. They listened, and it did the trick, and you get compliance because it was their idea, sort of. And that definitely is a situation where if you make it reasonable and you let them get involved in it, then you can have one of the most important parts, because a rule you make and put in a rule book won't save one fish unless out there they're doing it. And I think that's a very good statement as to if you let the fishing people, recreational or commercial, work on a situation, you will have a better chance that whatever you do put in that looks good in the rule book will in fact do what you want it to do. Thank you.
Okay, we have some next steps outlined. So I have Terry, and I'm going to take one question from the audience because I saw her hand go up. So go ahead, Terry. You got the last board word on this.
Thanks, Madeline. I don't know if you're here today, earlier when we had a somewhat lively discussion on eels. And
it's here part of the time.
My counterpart from New Hampshire whispered over to me that perhaps eels would be an interesting case study. We're looking at some significant reductions in what is right now Maine's #2 fishery. And I'm happy to follow up with you offline after this.
Okay, great. Thanks, Terry.
Dick Allen, this will be the last comment. Thank you, Madeline. It's been great.
Yeah, I'm just speaking as a member of the public who has been very interested in ITQs and catch shares and advocated for them since about 1990. And I think Madeline gave you a little bit of misinformation when she said that the New England groundfish fishery, as have fisheries around the world, are losing all the small-scale fishermen because of ITQs. The data that I've looked at indicates, well, first of all, that the New England ground fishery doubled in participation between 1975 and 80. The fishery was already fully exploited. The fishery became seriously depleted. People started leaving the fishery in the 1990s, and the consolidation rates in the groundfish fishery were higher before the catch share program was put into place than they have been since Amendment 16. So I don't think it's at all fair or even accurate to say that ITQs have caused serious consolidation in the New England groundfish fishery. And because it's such an important issue in so many fisheries, I think we need to try to correct information like that.
I'll let Dick and Madeline discuss that.
Can I have one word?
No, go ahead.
Okay. Dick and I have been arguing this since about 19 whatever. So it's not an old discussion, but I will say that it's the small scale fishermen that seem to be falling by the wayside. And it's not just consolidation, but it's who is losing out.
Thank you, Madeline.
Thank you.
Okay, we have several more reports to get through. Emily Green has joined us, and she's going to give the Atlantic Coastal Fish Habitat Partnership report, as she's done for the past couple of meetings. So, Emily.
Thanks, Mr. Chairman. The Atlantic Coastal Fish Habitat Partnership Steering Committee met yesterday and today, discussed and came to decision on numerous activities which they're conducting in three major topic areas: on-the-ground fish habitat restoration, science decision support tools, and partnership building. To begin, we received 19 applications this year for on-the-ground fish habitat restoration project funding. Yesterday, the steering committee considered the scores provided by its project review team and will finalize a ranked list and submit to Fish and Wildlife Service by the end of this year. The steering committee also heard an update and agreed to move forward with implementing a conservation mooring project at Able and Willing Marinas near Jamestown, Rhode Island, with funds from the National Marine Fisheries Service. The steering committee also heard an update on a National Fish and Wildlife Foundation grant, which ACFIP and the Nature Conservancy are jointly leading to convene stakeholders and experts to develop a set of river herring restoration strategies. We anticipate coordinating with we anticipate coordinating these efforts with other groups working on river herring conservation planning that Tony just briefed you on earlier. In addition, the steering committee reviewed survey questions, which will go out to habitat restoration and passage restoration practitioners in the near future. The purpose of this survey is to collect information about on-the-ground restoration work currently being conducted by our partners along the coast in order to better align with and provide support to these efforts. On the science front, the steering committee discussed and confirmed ACFIP's guidelines regarding endorsing science projects, which articulate that research projects will be considered so long as there is a clear connection to an ACFIP protection or restoration habitat objective. Also on the science front, the steering committee heard an update and provided feedback on a North Atlantic Landscape Conservation Cooperative funded habitat assessment, which is being conducted by a contractor, Downstream Strategies. ACFIP is taking the lead in guiding the coastal component of the project, pulling in pertinent technical expertise as we move forward. In the very near future, the partnership will be submitting a species habitat matrix manuscript for publication in Science, and will be serving the results of that project online. The steering committee also discussed several collaborative science, communications, and operational activities that are being developed with the 2 other East Coast fish habitat partnerships and other coastally focused fish habitat partnerships nationwide. I'll be happy to provide more information on these initiatives offline for those of you who are interested. Actually some really exciting work happening there. Lastly, the steering committee provided or approved a set of criteria for bringing in new MOU partners. And to wrap up, we had an opportunity to visit some of the terrific work that the Georgia DNR is conducting on oyster reef restoration sites in the area, which was a lot of fun. So that concludes my update. Thank you.
Always concise but comprehensive, Emily. Thank you. Questions, family? Well, looks like an easy one. Good. That was a good report. Thank you. We have, is Mark Robson here? Hey, Mark, come on up. Mark is going to present the Law Enforcement Committee report. And I bet the estuarine work around here must be pretty interesting. The marshes, and it's just an incredible piece of the country. Go ahead, Mark.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Since our Law Enforcement Committee just broke up a little while ago, I haven't been able to complete the written report for you, the summary of our work today, but just to give you a few of the highlights. We had a couple of discussions with your ASMFC staff. Marin Hawk and Tony Kearns came in and talked to the LEC about a number of different issues relating to identification issues with Asian horseshoe crab, some discussion about dusky shark identification problems that law enforcement might see in the field. And of course, Tony has talked to us about a couple of other issues related to research set-asides and also some issues regarding, and I'm trying to remember now what.
Trip limits in the dogfish.
Yes, trip limits in the dogfish, spiny dogfish fishery, where there may be consideration of cumulative trip limits versus daily trip limits and possible problems with different jurisdictions having different trip limit standards. We had a guest speaker today who came and talked to us, Mr. George LaPointe, came and talked to the LEC about his project working on some of the monitoring technology that they're looking at to report back to the councils, federal councils, and he was specifically there and asked to be there to get input from a law enforcement perspective on those tools that may become available or that are being used now, such as onboard video cameras or other electronic monitoring, and some of the concerns that might ensue when you try to apply those to enforcement type of issues. So we had some good discussion. I think he came away with some good insights into some of the enforcement issues surrounding those technologies. We also had a conference call today with the National Coordinator for NOAA and their Joint Enforcement Agreement Program, which is the agreements that NOAA has with the states to help fund law enforcement activities, particularly for federally related activities. And so it was good to have that person on the phone with everybody from the LEC representing the various states and the entities that are involved in that. And particularly because of the government shutdown, some of the concerns with reimbursement processes and where the status of certain JEA funds or agreements were at. So I think we cleared the air on some of those issues as well. And that's pretty much the highlights. Again, I'll provide a written summary as I was working on that at the time when I got called down. But we did have an election, and we now have a new chairman of the LEC. and that's Lloyd Ingerson from the great state of Maryland. And the LEC elected a new vice chair, and that will be Michael Eastman from the great state of New Hampshire. And Mr. Chairman, that's my report.
Thank you, Mark. Any questions for Mark? Good report. I recommend that if you have a chance to attend one of their meetings, or you can sit in for a few minutes. I've done it, and I try to do it every time. I didn't get there this week, so thanks, Mark. Thank you. Rich, did you have a question for Mark? Sorry.
Well, just a comment on your comment. I was able to attend for a while this morning, and I also try to sit in when I can. And if there is the opportunity to schedule law enforcement in a time when more of us might be able to attend, and I'm not sure just how you do that, but if there is that opportunity, I think there might be more commissioners, willing to sit in, and when we're there, we get asked questions. So, I think it's a good interaction.
I was frisked when I was there, but I see Dr. Armstrong is at the table. Mike Armstrong has been chair of the Management and Science Committee, which met this week, and I hear he has an exhaustive report to provide. Very, very extensive report.
I do, Paul. I have 45 minutes or so. Is that all right?
I'm going to say for you, yeah, go ahead.
Thank you. You can pull the hook at 6 minutes. 6 minutes. We actually were very busy. We covered a lot of topics, but I think most people here, the most germane, what you want to hear about is the climate change things we've been working on. So let me blast through just touching on a few things so you know what's going on. We did talk about, led by Marin Hawk, we will be putting all the state fishing rules on the ASMFC website. We think that's probably a product people need. The rec regs will probably go on as a list, but the commercial regs, because they're so dynamic in every state, we'll probably put that as just a link. But it's another way to get to the public so they can find things easier. We talked about compliance reports, and staff is going to take a very critical look at them. The feeling being they really should be compliance reports, short, to the point. Some states, my own included, can get kind of wordy, so staff has trouble pulling out the germane information. So you might see a shortening in a little more concise form for compliance reports. And also we talked about surveys, state and federal. We tend to go and get data several times a year for every assessment. We're talking about a methodology where we can get all the data in one fell swoop and minimize for state and federal people that job. We heard about a system called MATOS, the Mid-Atlantic Telemetry Observation System, which is a system being set up with analysis tools and a backing database to store acoustic data. There are now thousands and thousands of fish and receivers on the East Coast that are very ad hoc being managed and turned into data. So the presenter, Doug Wilson, showed us this currently not well-funded methodology that a lot of research could potentially use. It's very interesting. So it's sort of in the, it's developed, but it needs a little more, and they'll be looking for money for that. We reviewed the stock assessment schedule in terms of, does it make sense for staff time, knowing that a lot of the state biologists are really burdened by doing a lot of assessments. So there's a lot coming up, but we signed off that the current schedule looks pretty good. There are some outside peer reviews coming up, and we will be looking for reviewers for tautog and black drum, which I believe will be done together, and for lobster. So if anyone has ideas of potentially good reviewers for those, we'd like to hear about it. We did spend a fair amount of time. We're still working on the management of risk and uncertainty. And we have a subgroup, but we brought in the whole group to talk about it more. We have a document that will be coming to you very shortly that is a list for every species of all scientific uncertainty and all management uncertainty. That itself will be a useful document to look at. The next step is the ASC is working on a straw man of how to insert uncertainty. All the councils have done it. My guess is you folks don't want the kind of rigidity that is in the council methodologies. So they're going to present, they'll have a straw man, probably maybe next meeting, about how to address scientific uncertainty, and we'll be still working on how to address the management uncertainty. It could be anywhere from ad hoc or to a rigid system. So we're working on that. So anyway, let me tell you a little bit about the climate. We spent, again, a considerable amount of time. This has been in the hopper for several months. We basically have 4 presentations, really, and I'm just going to talk about one mostly, but we heard from, there's a group of Chris Kennedy, Malin Pinsky, who is really an up-and-coming superstar in spatial modeling. They just got a grant to look at summer flounder. They're out of Rutgers and VCU and NIMS, looking at connectivity of the stock, movement and displacement in response to temperature or other variables, but the important part is they really want to see if they can come up with management implications out of it. The timeline for that, unfortunately, is probably 2 years. Of course, we talked also with Jason McNamee about Dave Simpson's Fluke Working Group, which is doing something very related to what we're trying to accomplish. I'm not sure it'll be exactly in place, but it's definitely going to be an adjunct. We'll be talking with those folks. We heard from Wendy Morrison of NIMS, who's working on a vulnerability analysis for all species, I think in the U.S., but fortunately, they're working on the Northeast and Mid-Atlantic first. So this will be analysis of the key species based on their physiology, their biology, how vulnerable are they into temperature increases. So that will be also a helpful document. Now, one we heard about, led by John Hare at NIMS and with his postdoc Rich Bell and others, is analysis that we've been working hard with them on. They're doing the work, and I really thank NIMS for the work they're putting into it. His analysis shows, and again, there's dozens of data sets just for temperature, and you have to pick which one is right. So they went with this methodology, so they're not done. But their findings right now are the abundance of fluke is clearly higher now in southern New England. So they did analysis to figure that out. And basically from, I think the time series was late 70s till today. And the factors that came out important are temperature, but to a greater degree, it's really about the age structure of the stock expanding in response to the good management we've had. Older fish go further north, and so there is tremendously more abundance in southern New England now than there was at the time when the quotas were set back in the late 80s. So the next step is what do we do with that? But they have more analysis to, and we've asked them to put the next species in the queue to be black sea bass. So looking at the timeline that we laid out, we're actually fairly well on it, but I add the caveat that we had several hours discussion. We will not achieve what we put out, which was basically a year and a half, mostly because the science is taking a long time. So we're kind of at a crossroads. Do we sit and wait for the science to get where we need it to be, or do we go another route? Do we go more qualitative? So we can wait. There's another option, but let me step back and say there's not a ton of staff time or expertise for these sort of analyses. And we're very lucky that NIMS has stepped in and can do these things for us. The other thing we might want to consider is bring out outside consultants, which of course take money. And whether or not that's available, I don't know. That could speed up the process. So we're at sort of a crossroads. we're getting the science that proves that redistribution has taken place. And I forgot to add, we've reviewed dozens and dozens of papers, and you've all seen them. There's some seminal work published in Science and peer-reviewed literature. It's happening. The question is, how do you quantify it? And so John Hare's doing a good job with Fluke. But the next step is a reallocation scheme, and that can go many different ways. So the committee is proposing that we send out a survey. We come up with a handful of straw men of how we could handle reallocation. They'll be very general. Send it out to you folks, to technical staff, to maybe industry. And I guess it would be, here's one proposal. Can you live with it? Do you hate it? Would you fight to the death to prevent it? And we're proposing that, so we'd like to get your comment on whether a survey would be useful. Other than that, we're flying blind creating these reallocation schemes. Even if we get an outside entity, we still need to provide direction. So I actually don't really have anything more than that. You got your mic on. You could quit and point.
We're going to fight to the death. Go ahead. We'll take questions from Mike. Roy, I take it it's on this last topic.
Yes. Thank you, Mike. What I heard concerning Fluke, I heard conflicting opinions, if I may. And I was wondering if you could help me sort that out a little bit. Is it in fact because of expansion of the age structure of the stock that larger Fluke are now appearing in New England, or is it in fact related to climate change? Which is the more important factor in your view? Thank you.
That's a good question. So let me step back. If you look at the relative abundance, say off Virginia, North Carolina, the abundance is a little bit more than what it was back in the period when quotas were set. In southern New England, it's tremendously more abundant. So the models come out more significant for the expansion of age structure because bigger fish travel further. They end up in New England waters during the spring and summer and fall, then go back to deeper water. Those fish in ages, 6, 7, 8, were not present back in the late 80s because of fishing effort. They're now present. They're filling New England waters. There is a signal that comes out significant in the models they ran for temperature. The problem, as I see, and they still have to tease this out, is the recovery of the stock overlies the temperature increase perfectly. So they're very confounded. So the models have to fight to tease out which is more important. At this point, they're saying the expansion of the age structure. They didn't analyze any data from the Gulf of Maine, and we've all heard about fluke, scup, sea bass pouring into the Gulf of Maine. They haven't incorporated that. They're struggling with how they would do that, whether it show the same pattern. So anyway, does that answer? Temperature, yes, is important. The age structure expansion is more important. That's what we're sitting on right now. That's not published. It's, but they're standing by that right now.
You guys actually did good work there. Not bad. That's very informative.
I can turn off the smoke machine now.
Any other questions for Mike? Bob?
Well, I guess just to follow up on Mr. Miller's comment, I mean, I find the cause interesting, but I find the result even more interesting, the result being the apparent redistribution of the stock. So, as I understand your proposed follow-up, it's a survey to perhaps throw out some new configurations, some new allocation schemes, and ask people what they think about them? Did I misunderstand that, or can you clarify that?
Yeah, I think that is basically what we're thinking. For instance, I mean, we could suggest to an outside contractor or some NIMS folks, give us an allocation scheme, and they'd say, where do you want us to start? There may be some non-starters. We heard a few things. For instance, we could define a period of recovery, and quota increase after that would be disproportionately distributed to the states that have had greater abundance in the recent years. You know, you may say, that's all right, that's workable. There may be other people that say no. So we're looking to see if something jumps out as a non-starter, and also asking people if they can come up with things too. So there's a limited number of different schemes you could do, and I think you might see a half a dozen and say yes, no, maybe, no way.
Dave and then Jim.
Yeah, I was going to suggest that maybe, you know, our working group and you, the two of us for starters, kind of the chairs of the two groups, could get together and share some ideas and come out with a game plan.
I think that sounds terrific.
Does the committee plan on writing up their findings?
Well, this isn't our findings, really.
I know, but you've done a good review of existing literature, and you've met with researchers. It would be nice if we had a memo of some sort so we could institutionalize some of that.
Okay. A brief white paper.
A brief white paper.
I'm amenable to anything because this is my last day as the chair.
Yeah.
So.
Okay. And you'll take any assignment on behalf of the committee.
Whatever you got.
Yeah. Jim?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And I was going to say the same thing Dave said. I think it would be good to hook the two groups together because it's obviously a lot of overlap. Timing, if you do that survey, how long would that take? Because that's the clock's ticking on this, and 2014 and our decisions are coming down pretty quick. So,
well, yeah, we're not going to have a reallocation model for 2014. The survey, we get it in and out in a month or two. Just do Survey Monkey or something like that, you know.
All right, so it sounds like you've made some progress, and that is mostly related to you know, what's happening with some of these stocks. They do seem to be moving or expanding, and for a couple of different reasons. So the next step looks like it's coming, but not next meeting, or maybe next year. But I appreciate that, and I guess we'll hear more about that. It would be, I think, very helpful if we had a written summary of this. I think that would help these folks think about it and get more questions to you. Thank you, Mike. I did say under other business that we had a couple of things to talk about relative to letters and that sort of thing. Did you have something, Terry? Or
from the hearing section.
Oh, the other business? Yeah, we have a couple of things. Let me start with Tony and the DOJ attorney.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. At the beginning of the meeting, staff passed out an email that was from Scott Doyle to all the commissioners. And this email is presenting the commission with an opportunity to provide comments to the U.S. District Court concerning the investigation of illegal and underreported summer flounder by an RSA fisherman. We did send out press releases concerning this case. It was a New York commercial fisherman, Charlie Wirtz, pleaded guilty to covering up through the use of false VTRs and false dealer reports the illegal harvest of summer flounder from 2009 to 11 that approximated almost 86,000 pounds of summer flounder that was worth just under $200,000. And he admitted to at least 137 false dealer reports to be submitted during that time frame. It seems from reading this email that there are concerns with the sentencing for this case because it is a nonviolent case and that the victim is mostly the ecosystem, that there may not be a charge that equals the guilty plea from the attorney. And so the commission could provide comments to the court if it is the will of the policy board that addresses the importance of honest reporting on catch and sales data in terms of the resources available to ground truth, the actual use of submissions in formulating policy and quota decisions, the extent of the deception as to how it disrupts the modeling and policy setting for management in light of the RSA program where the quota is auctioned off, and how illegal harvest impacts the population of available fish and or impacts on the other fishermen that are not reporting illegally. I also did touch on this letter with the law enforcement committee this morning because it was also, or the email was also sent to them, and if the policy board does decide to send a letter, then the law enforcement committee recommended that it includes the importance of setting penalties and fines high enough to deter others from also doing this action, as well as highlighting the number of law enforcement man hours that goes into investigating and prosecuting cases such as these. It's a quick turnaround, so the attorney needs a letter by November 8th.
Okay. I think many of us in our home jurisdictions have probably been in similar situations where serious fishery cases, and some maybe not so serious, but cases end up in criminal court, and we're concerned about the outcome and how they're judged, given the other slate of issues that the courts are dealing with. And I've seen what I thought were pretty egregious cases in our neck of the woods, get swept aside. So I think the only downside here is that it creates a precedent that this might become a faucet type thing, where now are we doing letters like this for every time someone asks for one. This one sounds like it is coming from the DOJ, so Department of Justice, so I assume it's a case that we're kind of invested in, and what do you think, Bob?
Yeah, I think so. And I think this is one of the first RSA cases that I'm aware of. And the RSA program is based on confidence in the managers. And if folks are using the RSA as an excuse or an opportunity to skirt the rules, I think it's probably worthwhile maybe commenting on this one.
And RSAs are becoming more popular, so I think it's important to draw the line. So is there any objection? If there's Adam?
Mr. Chairman, I certainly can't sit here and condone what happened in any way, shape, or form. That goes without saying. But that being said, we sat here earlier and had a specific request from a state about doing something with regards to aquaculture, and we said that might set a precedent, and acted against it. We can all pick up commercial fisheries news every month and read law enforcement. And to pick out one specific example, I think we have to think very clearly about that. Again, in no way do I endorse what's here. I think there might be an opportunity here for us to maybe step back and maybe weigh in at a higher level, wherein we could weigh in on the fact what a lot of this letter touches on, that the fines in a lot of these cases are not enough. But I think there's other places to weigh in than on a individual case against an individual. I have very real concerns about that as a precedent here.
Okay, it looks like this is going to require some discussion. Richie?
I guess I would have concern from Adam's point of view if we were getting these type of requests on a regular basis. But obviously, the Department of Justice felt that this warrants, additional help in getting the proper penalty, and has asked us. So I kind of think that takes it to a different level than if we were made aware of this and we were kind of sticking our nose into it. So I think there's a little bit difference here where they're looking for help, and I think it's worth doing it, and with the idea that if it starts to become a faucet, then we have to create some policy on when we do and when we don't.
Let me just ask Bob, do you recall the commission in recent years doing this type of testimony?
Yeah, on striped bass we did. Yeah.
Was it the Bay case recently?
Well, that one, Vince was actually, he was given the option of writing a letter or going to court to testify. So writing a letter is a much more attractive option at that point. But yeah, I mean, we don't, Richie's right, we have not received, to my recollection, this is the first opportunity to write a letter that we've received in a long time.
Go ahead, Pat.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chairman. I talked to Scott Doyle. As soon as it came in my email, I jumped on the phone and called him, and he says they need all the support they can. There are several major pending cases similar to this, as large as or larger, and they want to use this case as precedent. This guy just openly went totally against what he was supposed to be doing, and he was adamant about it, and kind of made a mockery of the whole situation. And he said any support that they can get from any organization such as ours would be greatly appreciated. And I do think this is one where we do want to help set precedent. And I doubt they'll be coming back, the JOI will be coming back at us again for a while, because they really want to get this guy to go to jail and show these people that we in the system means business. And the laws are there for a reason. That's to protect the species of fish that we're managing.
Okay, Adam.
With regard to Scott's specific request, if we followed it in the manner as he suggested, that we're writing a letter to the U.S. Probation Office in a general manner describing the severity and impact of these without specific reference to this individual and the prosecution therein, I think that would be a direction wherein we could provide that general level of information that I think he's requesting, as well as would be appropriate for us to weigh in at that level, and I would have no objection to that.
And neither would I. In fact, that was my initial impression. This is more like we're being asked to come in to provide expert testimony. How important these conservation programs are, what's the jeopardy when you corrupt them this way, when they're corrupted in any way. But so if there's no objection, why don't we ask Bob to respond to the request from a high level and not deal with this case specifically, but certainly the RSA program, what our conservation expectations are, and so forth. And I don't think we're going to have time to circulate the letter ahead of time and to get a lot of back and forth, but I'm sure Bob will use some good judgment, and our offices will take a look at it. The chair and the chair could take a look at it. Okay. And like Mike said, that won't be me. So, all right. There's some other issues here, and now Terry, the herring section has a request to do a letter. You want to talk about that?
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chairman. It seems like a month ago, but first thing on Monday morning, the herring section made a motion recommending that the policy board send a letter to the New England Council requesting to have its SSC and PDT work with the Commission's Herring Technical Committee as a priority issue to identify what's known about Georges Bank, Nantucket shoal spawning, and to provide an offshore sampling protocol for the purposes of protecting spawning herring. This motion carried without any objection.
Okay, is there any, I don't believe there'll be any objection to that. Sounds like a very reasonable thing to do, so will do. The Lobster Board has something similar. Doug Grout, you want to talk about this?
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chairman. We actually have two letters. It's a good thing you're not going to be, because Lewis is going to be very busy here with letters. The first letter that the Lobster Board is asking the Policy Board support being developed is a comment letter from the Commission on upcoming proposed rules on implementation of trap reductions and transferability. We were given a heads up by NOAA Fisheries that these proposed rules were going to be out for comment between this meeting and our next meeting, and the comment period will close. So we asked board members to provide any kind of input and comments to our to Kate, and then we would, with the approval of the Policy Board, we develop a comment letter. Okay.
And the other is a completely different topic?
Completely different, well, other than the fact that it applies to lobsters. Do you want me to talk about that one too, or do?
No. Is there no objection about that particular letter going to, I guess, National Marine Fisheries Service? Seeing none, you got it. What's the other one, Doug?
The other one is actually a response letter. The council has sent the commission a letter because of concerns that were brought up by the council's law enforcement committee about gear marking, buoy markings for fixed gear out in federal waters, and they asked that the commission work with the Large Whale Take Reduction Plan and also have the STEG directors get together and try to come up with some feedback on how we might be able to effectively have some marking that mobile gear could see out in federal waters, and maybe have some consistent gear markings. The state directors from Maine, New Hampshire, and Massachusetts, or their representatives, got together, and we had a conference call and have some feedback that we'd like to provide to the New England Council on the directions that we're going to proceed.
And so you'd like that to be a letter under the commission heading to the New England Fisheries Management Council?
Correct.
Okay. Seeing no objection to that, we'll go for that as well. Thank you, Doug. And Tony, you have one for summer flounder, scup, black sea bass?
I actually have two. Since Dr. Pierce is not here and he is the chair of the Summer Flounder Scup Black Sea Bass Board, the first letter that they recommended that the Policy Board send is a reply to the New York Commission informing them of the action that the Fluke Board took to initiate addendum for moving forward with the 2014 recreational summer flounder fishing year, and just letting them know what steps we're taking.
Any objection to that one? Sounds good. You got it.
And the second letter, Bob, correct me if I get this wrong, is a letter to the New England the Northeast Fisheries Science Center and the Mid-Atlantic Fishery Management Council, highlighting the Commission's concern for the black sea bass stock and the lack of progress to move forward on a sea bass assessment, and us wanting encouraging them to make that a priority. Is that about it?
About it. It was more it was particularly focused on the spatial analysis of stock structure as a key source of scientific uncertainty, holding black sea bass at that tier 4 level, and as far as I know, no ongoing research. So it was a call to kind of prioritize that research.
Very good. So without objection, that'll be the final letter for this week. With that, if there's no other business to come before the section, go ahead.
Sorry, Paul. One more. It's my understanding that there was a presentation at the Executive Committee from the state of Maine to the Executive Committee on eels, and I didn't hear the presentation, obviously, but questioned the appropriateness of when there's a contentious issue at a species board, and prior to that, there is what I assume would be a sales pitch or an explanation of a direction a state is going to go, and it's only given to 1/3 of the commissioners. I think that could create some real issues, and I wonder whether that's something that the policy board should look at to see if that's something that should take place in the future.
Okay, point well taken. I thought it was my impression that the representative from Maine was just giving us the heads up, given that the eel board was coming up shortly after our meeting. I don't know if I sensed it was more of a sales pitch other than this is what I plan on doing at the next meeting, so I thought I'd give you the heads up. So, but clearly, if the executive committee business should not be focused on specific fisheries management issues that are being dealt with by boards, especially those boards that are keyed up to deal with the issue. We should be more at a higher level administrative function. But Dennis, did you want to add anything to that?
Well, I do want to comment because, to me it was clearly a sales pitch, and it, in my mind, my thought was it's taken us back somewhat to the old days where we always thought that the administrative commissioners were able to do things on their own. And I understand what the gentleman was trying to do, but like Richie said, I didn't put Richie up to this, by the way. I just, as you know, and as I objected at the meeting, I just thought it was inappropriate for us to go in that direction.
I don't disagree, and all I can say is, as your chairman, I'm going to work to the end of my term to make sure that it doesn't happen again. And I'm going to let the next chairman know. So if there's no other business to come before the policy board, I'll consider us adjourned, and we're going to immediately begin the business session.